You know that screen you're probably looking at right now? The one we're all glued to for hours every day? Well, it turns out it's sending our brains a secret signal, and the effects are pretty wild.
So let's get right into it. Is your screen keeping you up at night, or could it actually be making you smarter? It sounds like it has to be one or the other, right? But when scientists really put this to the test, what they found was this totally fascinating paradox about the light our devices give off, especially after the sun goes down.
You know, most of us just think, oh, I'll turn down the brightness at night. But the real story here is way more subtle. It's not just about how much light is hitting your eyes, it's about the specific type of light. Think of it like a secret recipe of different colors all mixed together. And as it turns out, some of those colors have a much, much bigger impact on our brains than others. So, to get to the bottom of this, researchers couldn't just, ask people how they felt. They needed cold, hard data. They had to see what was really going on inside their brains and bodies. And that meant heading straight into the sleep lab for a very carefully designed experiment. Okay, so here's the setup. They got 13 healthy young guys to volunteer. Each of them spent 2 different evenings in these special lab rooms, totally isolated, no outside light getting in. And for 5 hours straight, 5 hours, right before their normal bedtime, they just sat in front of a computer screen. The only real light source in the room, the screen itself. Now, here is where it gets really clever. The volunteers didn't use the same screen both nights. See, on one night, they got a modern LED screen, the kind that pumps out a ton of that short-wavelength blue light. On the other night, they got an older non-LED screen with way less blue light. But here's the kicker. The volunteers said both screens seemed equally bright. So to their eyes, there was no difference. The only thing that really changed was that invisible ingredient, the dose of blue light. All right, the experiment is running. The researchers start collecting data, and they're looking for clues. The very first clue they uncover has to do with this super important hormone. You can think of it as our body's own internal timekeeper for sleep. And that hormone is melatonin. It's often called the hormone of darkness, and for good reason. Basically, when it gets dark outside, your brain starts pumping this stuff out, and it sends a message to your entire body that says, hey, it's nighttime, time to start winding down. And boom, here is the first huge finding. Look at this. After those 5 hours, the folks using the LED screen, the one with all the blue light, had their melatonin levels crushed. I mean, significantly lower. Their bodies just weren't getting that critical "it's time for bed" signal nearly as strong as the other group. So in the researchers' own words, the brain's internal clock, what they call the circadian pacemaker, was basically being fooled. That extra blue light from the LED screen was sending a signal that said, nope, still daytime. It was like the screen was telling their body that the day was longer than it really was, putting the brakes on nighttime. Okay, so if your body is producing less of the sleepy hormone, it makes sense that you'd feel more awake, right? Well, that's exactly what the researchers wanted to find out next. How did this change in biology translate to how the volunteers actually felt and how they performed? And yep, that is exactly what the data showed. But this wasn't just about people saying, yeah, I don't feel tired. They had the receipts. The researchers found objective, measurable proof in their bodies and brains that they were, for sure, more alert. They tracked a few key things. For one, fewer of those slow, rolling eye movements you get when you're about to drift off. 2, they looked at brainwaves and saw less of that slow frequency activity that screams drowsiness. And 3, well, the participants just flat out said they felt less sleepy. Every single sign pointed to the same thing. That LED screen was like a shot of electronic caffeine. All right, so the story seems simple, doesn't it? Blue light from screens messes with your melatonin, makes you feel less sleepy, which is bad for sleep. End of story. Case closed, but not so fast. This is where things took a really unexpected turn. Get this. While one part of their body was being told, don't go to sleep yet, another part, their brain, was getting a very different message. It was being told, wake up, pay attention. And you know what? It was listening. So the researchers threw a bunch of cognitive tests at them. First up, an attention test. And the group using the LED screen, they had way faster reaction times. They were just quicker, sharper. Next, they had to estimate how much time had passed, a tricky task that really tests your working memory. And guess what? The LED screen group nailed it. They were better at that too. And finally, a classic memory test where they had to remember pairs of words. And once again, the LED group came out on top. They were way better at spotting which word pairs were new. Their memory was just plain sharper. Okay, let's just stop and think about that for a second because this is the wild part. The exact same blue light that was telling their bodies don't sleep was also telling their brains be smarter. It was boosting their attention, their working memory, and their declarative memory all at the same time. So, what's the final verdict here? What are we supposed to make of all this? Well, as you can probably guess by now, it's not as simple as screens are bad. It's way more complicated than that. This table really lays it all out. The researchers themselves called it a double-edged sword. On the one side, the downside, that blue light messes with our biology, right? It tanks our melatonin, delays our sleep signals. But on the flip side, the upside, it makes us feel more alert and actually helps us perform better mentally, which, let's be honest, is pretty useful if you're trying to cram for an exam or meet a deadline. And this is why this whole thing matters so much to every single one of us. Think about it. The devices we use every single night to work, to study, to connect with people, they are in a direct conflict with the ancient biological clock that's hardwired into our DNA. So this all leaves us with a really cool, forward-thinking question. What if our screens aren't the enemy here? What if they could actually be part of the solution? The researchers floated this idea of a future where screens are smart. Imagine a screen that changes its light throughout the day to work with our body clock, giving us that alerting blue heavy light when we need to focus, but then automatically dialing it back in the evening to help us get ready for a great night's sleep. Now that is a pretty bright idea, isn't it?